Welcome to Ripper's Nighttime Tales, a chilling series of bedtime horror stories narrated by the horror streamer Mr. Rippers with soft rain and thunder. Drift off to multiple scary tales perfect for late night listening on rumble.com. Do hit that like button and consider following the channel. Leave a comment letting me know where and when you listen. Let's build a community. Okay, let's get started. Infernal Depths, Part 1, Descent. The cold was the first lie. Standing at the precipice of Black Hollow that morning, the New Hampshire air was biting, a crisp 40 degrees that turned our breath into transient ghosts. The mist clung to the pines, obscuring the valley floor where the mine entrance sat like an open wound in the mountainside. The iron gates, sealed since the 80s, were wrapped in heavy chains that had rusted into a single fused mass of oxidized metal. They looked less like security measures and more like ribs calcified, brittle ribs caging something that had stopped breathing a long time ago. Or so we thought. I adjusted the strap of my helmet, checking the seal on my clipboard. My name is Lena Grant. I am the state mine inspector. I deal in structural integrity, methane levels, and water table encroachment. I deal in the physics of rock and gravity. I do not deal in folklore. I do not deal in the things that the locals whispered about in the diner 3 miles up the road. They called it the mouth below. I called it Contract 409. Looks tight, Briggs grunted, spitting a stream of coffee onto the frost-covered gravel. He was our foreman, a man built from gristle and bad attitude, with a scar running down his neck that looked like a jagged map of a river. He didn't look at the mine, he looked through it. Grant, you got the schematics? I have the maps from 82, I said, my voice sounding thin in the open air, but they're incomplete. The lower galleries aren't fully surveyed. We go until the structural integrity looks compromised, or we hit water, Briggs said. Simple in, simple out. Get the readings, confirm the seal is holding, leave. The team was small. Beside Briggs stood Dr. Malik, a geologist whose silence was heavier than the pack of humming instruments strapped to his back. He was staring at the ground, watching a line of ants march away from the mine entrance. Not around it, away from it. Then there was Cole Stevens. 30 years underground had left him with a permanent stoop and a face etched with coal dust that no amount of scrubbing could remove. He was chewing tobacco with a rhythmic, nervous jaw motion. He smelled of stale smoke and fear. And finally, Danny, the rookie. He was practically vibrating with energy, his helmet light already clicked on, bobbing like a lone star against the gray morning. He looked at the rusted gates like they were the entrance to Disney World. "Ready when you are, boss," he chirped. Cole muttered something under his breath. I caught the tail end of it. Shouldn't wake it. "Cut the spooky shit, Cole," Briggs snapped. He pulled a bolt cutter from the truck bed. With a groan of leverage, the rusted chains snapped. The sound was obscenely loud, a gunshot cracking through the valley. The doors groaned open. The air that hit us wasn't stale. It didn't smell like stagnant water or old earth. It smelled like copper, like old pennies held in a sweaty palm. Let's move," Briggs ordered. We walked into the throat of the mountain. The sunlight died behind us within 50 feet, swallowed by the absolute, suffocating dark that only exists underground. Our headlamps cut cones of white through the gloom, illuminating rails that were twisted like licorice ropes. The descent was gradual at first. The incline was manageable, the air breathable. I watched the walls, shale, mostly, some granite intrusion, standard for this range. I tapped my pen against the clipboard, logging the condition of the support beams, rotting timber. But the steel reinforcements held. 30 meters down, the silence began to gain weight. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was a pressure against the eardrums. Dr. Malik stopped first. He was staring at the handheld console in his gloved hand. The green light of the screen illuminated his frown. "Reading?" Briggs asked, not stopping. "Temperature Malik said softly. It's jumped. Ventilation is dead, I offered, shining my light on a collapsed air duct. Heat pockets are normal. Not like this, Malik corrected. Ambient temperature at the entrance was 4 degrees Celsius. Here, it's 38. I paused. 38 degrees Celsius. That was nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I hadn't noticed the sweat beading on my forehead until he said it, but now the heat seemed to rush in, heavy and wet. It wasn't a dry heat. It was a tropical, suffocating humidity that made my coveralls stick to my back. Too hot for this shallow, Briggs grunted, wiping his brow. Keep moving. We checked the main gallery, then we turned back. We went deeper. The rock changed. The gray shale gave way to a darker, more porous stone that seemed to absorb our light rather than reflect it. The temperature climbed with every step. My breathing grew shallow. The air felt thick, like inhaling soup. I reached out to steady myself against a support beam. Hiss. I jerked my hand back. The wood was hot. Not warm hot. The structure is conducting heat, I whispered, panic flaring in my chest for the first time. Briggs, the beams are heating up from the rock out. There's a geothermal source we missed. There's no volcanic activity in New Hampshire, Lena, Malik said, his voice straining for rationality. It's impossible. Tell that to my hand, I snapped. We walked for another hour. The footsteps of the team fell out of sync. The echoes were wrong. When Danny stepped, the sound of his boot hitting the gravel seemed to arrive a split second too late, as if the air itself was delaying the physics of sound. Then, the first sound came. It wasn't a collapse. It wasn't the groaning of the earth settling. It came from ahead of us, deep in the dark. A long, low exhale. Whew, we all froze. Cole spun around, his eyes wide and white in the gloom. Tell me you heard that. Tell me I'm not crazy. Air pressure equalizing, Briggs said, though his hand had moved to the heavy flashlight on his belt, gripping it like a truncheon. Just wind. There is no wind, Malik whispered. He held up a sensor. Air velocity is 0. That wasn't wind. We pressed on, driven by Briggs's stubborn momentum. We reached the main gallery. It was an enormous chamber, vaulted like a cathedral. But where a cathedral is built to elevate the spirit, this place was built to crush it. The walls shimmered. I shone my light across the surface. They were wet. A thick, viscous sheen coated the rock, shimmering faintly crimson. Malik's instruments began to whine a high-pitched electronic scream. He slapped the side of the device. Magnetic interference. The sensors are scrambling. Temperature? I asked, my throat dry. 42 degrees? Briggs walked to the center of the chamber. He pulled a stick of chalk from his pocket to mark the structural pillar, a standard protocol to indicate we'd reached the checkpoint. He dragged the chalk across the stone. Screeton. The sound that echoed back wasn't the dry rasp of chalk on stone. It was the sound of metal scraping against bone. It was high, wet, and agonizing. Danny stepped back, his boots scuffing the gravel. Mr. Briggs, what was that? Briggs looked at the chalk in his hand. The tip was red. Not from the chalk, it was white chalk, but as if the rock had bled onto it. He dropped it. Then the wind hit us. It blasted down the tunnel from the depths, a sudden, violent gust. But it wasn't cool ventilation air. It was air from an oven. It hit my face with physical force, smelling of sulfur, copper, and something sickeningly sweet, like meat left out in the sun. It's breathing, Cole whimpered. God Almighty, the mountain is breathing. That's not geological, Malik said, his voice trembling. There is no venting system this shallow capable of that pressure. We're leaving, Briggs said. His voice was tight. The bravado was cracking. Now, turn around. As we turned, Danny's light swept across the far wall of the gallery. Wait, the kid said. Look. We looked. Burned into the stone, seared black against the wet red rock, were prints, handprints, hundreds of them. They were clustered together, overlapping, frantic, and they were all reaching upward. The heat surged again, a tangible wave that made my vision swim. And from the darkness behind us, beneath the sound of our own ragged breathing, something answered. A low, wet click in the back of the throat of the world. Part 2. The heat. The retreat was a lie, too. We weren't retreating, we were being herded. The lamps were dimming. My LED headlamp, rated for 70 hours, was flickering after 3. The darkness of the mind felt aggressive, pressing in against the fragile cones of light, trying to smother them. The tunnel back felt different. Longer. The angles were wrong. I remembered a sharp left turn just past the gallery entrance, but we had been walking straight for 10 minutes. We missed the turn, I said, checking the compass on my wrist. The needle was spinning lazily, refusing to find north. There was no turn. Briggs barked from the front. Straight shot back to the lift. No, I argued, the heat making my thoughts sluggish. We came down a gradient. We're walking flat. My boots felt heavy. I looked down. The floor was covered in the same resinous slime that coated the gallery walls. It was sticky, clinging to the rubber soles, pulling back with every step. It looked like tar, but it smelled like infection. Power drains are electromagnetic, Malik muttered. He was walking beside me, eyes glued to his dying instruments. But there's no field reading. It's like the energy is just evaporating. Save your breath, Briggs said. We get out, we sort it topside, but the exit wasn't there. We reached a junction. 3 tunnels branched off where there should have been only the one rail line leading up. The rails themselves twisted and severed, ending abruptly in the rock floor as if the stone had grown over them. This isn't right. Danny's voice cracked. He sounded very young. We just came from that way. I grabbed my radio. Control, this is Grant. Do you copy? Control. Static. But not the white noise of empty airwaves. It was a heavy, rhythmic static. Kirsch, kirsch, like heavy, distorted breathing. Beneath the static, I heard low tones, growling. Climb gear, Briggs ordered, staring at the blocked path. The map shows an upper shaft, Sector E. We can reroute. That shaft was condemned in 1970, I said. Better than standing here waiting to cook, Briggs snapped. We began the climb up a narrow service chute. The ladder rungs were slick with the moisture. The heat was oppressive now. My coveralls were soaked. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. Too fast, fluttering like a trapped bird. Cole was above me, carrying the heavy rope anchor. I could see his hands trembling on the rungs. Halfway up, he stopped. Do you smell that? He whispered. I inhaled. The sulfur was stronger, but beneath it was the smell of cooking. Roast pork. Sweet, savory, and utterly terrifying in this context. Keep moving, Cole, I urged. No, he said. Listen. From below us, from the junction we had just left, came a sound. Scrape, step, scrape, step. It was the sound of something dragging itself. Heavy, wet. I looked down. The shaft below was a vertical tunnel of blackness. But in the center of that blackness, a shadow darker than the rest was pulsing. It looked swollen, bulbous. It didn't have limbs that I could see, but it was moving up the walls, defying gravity, flowing like thick sludge. Danny shone his light down. The beam hit the mass. It didn't reflect light, it absorbed it. Faster, Briggs yelled from above. We scrambled up the ladder, lungs burning. The air was getting thinner, hotter. When we hauled ourselves onto the upper platform, I collapsed, gasping. My throat tasted like copper. Lena looked down the shaft. The shape had stopped. It was just below the lip of the platform. The dust motes dancing in the beam of my light were rising and falling, pushed by the breath of the thing. For a second, just one fraction of a second, the flashlight flickered and illuminated it clearly. It was a human shape, but it had no edges. It was melted, the features running together like wax. It had no eyes, just smooth indentations, but it had a mouth that was open too wide. I scrambled back, kicking the hatch shut. "What did you see?" Malik asked, gripping my shoulder. His eyes were wild. "Nothing," I lied. I couldn't tell him. I couldn't tell him that the thing in the dark was wearing a tattered foreman's jacket from the 1980s. It looked familiar. 48 degrees, Malik said, staring at the wall. "Proteins denature at 45. We are cooking, Lena. We are literally cooking." Cole unstrapped his jacket, throwing it to the floor. "Can't stay here. Can't damn breathe." We moved into a narrow corridor. This was supposed to lead to the ventilation overflow, which would take us to daylight. But the heat shimmer was warping the air. The tunnel bent, not structurally, visually. The corners curved in ways that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The walls seemed to throb. "Jesus," I murmured. "It's moving." The rock walls were expanding and contracting. Malik crouched, touching the ground. He pressed his gloved hand into the stone. The stone gave. It rippled like memory foam. "It's organic," he whispered. Terror and fascination warred in his voice. "The silicon structure is mimetic. It's taken on biological properties. Organic." My ass, "We're leaving." Briggs started. Then the scream tore the air apart. Danny, he was trailing behind. He had stepped onto a patch of floor that looked solid. His boot had sunk, not into mud, but into the rock. The stone had closed around his ankle like a mouth. "Help! It's burning!" Danny shrieked, thrashing. Cole grabbed his arms. I grabbed his belt. We pulled. The heat spiked. The buckle of Danny's belt grew instantly hot, searing through my glove. I hissed, but held on. "Pull!" Briggs roared. Danny was screaming, a high, thin sound that didn't sound human anymore. The floor was bubbling around his leg, turning red. We gave one massive heave. Danny flew backward. We fell into a heap. He was free, but his boot was gone, and so was his foot. The stump was cauterized. Smooth, blackened flesh, sealed shut. No blood, just the smell of burnt meat filling the small tunnel. Danny stared at his leg, his eyes rolling back. He went into shock, instantly convulsing. The wall behind us cracked a sharp, loud pop like a giant knuckle cracking. The light from our lamps flashed red, then died completely. Part 3. Pressure. Darkness. Absolute heavy darkness. And the heat time warped after that. I tried to count seconds to keep a grip on reality, but the numbers slipped away. 1, 2, 5, 10, 1. "Malik," Briggs rasped. His voice sounded like he was gargling gravel. "Lights. Get the backup flares." A hiss, then a sputtering red glare illuminated the tunnel. The flare cast long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping fingers. "What the hell is happening to us?" Briggs asked. He looked skeletal in the red light, his eyes sunken. Malik was staring at the wall. "Thermogenic hallucinations," he mumbled. "Brain cooks itself. Time folds. Perception fails." "No," I interrupted, binding Danny's leg with a strip of cloth, though there was no blood to stop. "The passageways are different. The map is useless." Danny was mumbling, half delirious. "I saw lights," he whispered, "like miners, carrying lamps. They were right there." "There's no one here, kid," Briggs snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. I had seen them too. Faint silhouettes moving just behind the walls. Not in the tunnel with us, but inside the stone, as if the rock was glass and they were on the other side, carrying yellow glows. We rested in an alcove. The air temperature hit 51 degrees. I tried to drink from my canteen. The water was hot. It scalded my tongue. Sweat evaporated instantly from our skin, leaving a crust of salt that cracked when we moved. Cole removed his gloves to wipe his brow. As he rubbed his forehead, he screamed. He pulled his hand away. Strips of skin from his forehead peeled away with it. His skin had the consistency of wet paper. "Don't touch your face," Malik whispered. "We're fragile." "Pressure is dropping," Malik noted, looking at his barometer. "But how? There's no venting system." The mountain groaned. A deep, bending sound. The walls expanded, then contracted. Inhale, exhale. Cole began muttering prayers. His shadow on the wall, cast by the dying flare, began to move. It twitched. It stood up while Cole was still sitting. "We have to move," I said. "If we stop, we die." We picked Danny up. He was light, too light, as if the moisture had been sucked out of his bones. As we walked, Danny began whispering names. Coleman, Harris, Rourke. I froze. Those were names from the 1982 disaster. The men who were never found. Danny couldn't know those names? He wasn't even born then. "They're down there," Danny whispered, his head lolling on Briggs's shoulder. "They're waiting. It's warm. It's so warm." He jerked suddenly, a violent spasm that nearly knocked Briggs over. Then he went rigid. His eyes flew open, pupils blown wide, milky white. He seized, arching his back, and then went limp. The air smelled briefly of ozone and cooked skin. Briggs lowered him to the ground. He checked for a pulse. He held a mirror to Danny's mouth. Nothing. No one spoke for 5 minutes. The silence was filled by the heartbeat of the mountain. Thump, thump, thump. "We leave him," Briggs said finally. "We can't." I started. "He's dead weight, Lena," Briggs shouted. "Look at him." Danny's skin was already graying, sinking inward. The mine was reclaiming him fast. "We come back for him after the exit," Briggs said, softer. I knew he was lying. We weren't coming back. We weren't even sure we were going forward. Part 4. The collapse. The next chamber glowed. We didn't need the flares anymore. The rock itself was luminescent, pulsating with a dull ember red light. The heat was blinding. It felt like walking into a fire. My boots left black, sticky footprints on the stone. We found the gear. Old mining helmets, picks, rusted lunch pails, and bones. They were baked into the rock, not buried, merged. A femur protruding from the ceiling, a skull embedded in the floor, face up, mouth open, in a permanent scream. The stone had turned to wax and refrozen around them. Malik stared at the skull. "The fusion is cellular," he whispered. "The calcium has bonded with the silicates." Cole began laughing, a dry, rasping sound that turned into hacking sobs. "It's a stomach," he wheezed. "It's a goddamn stomach." The mountain screamed back. A crack tore through the chamber. The floor shifted violently, tilting 40 degrees. I fell, sliding toward a fissure that had opened in the corner. Heat blasted up from it, white hot. Briggs grabbed my harness and hauled me back. "We can't go back," Malik said, looking behind us. "It's closing." I turned. The tunnel we had just exited was sealing. The rock was flowing together like healing flesh. The opening narrowed from a doorway to a window, to a slit, to nothing. Smooth stone. The sound of Danny's voice returned. It echoed distantly, coming from the walls themselves. "It's fine down here, warm." Cole snapped. "I'm not staying," he screamed. He ran, not toward the exit, but toward a side tunnel that looked cooler, bathed in blue shadow. "Cole, wait," I yelled. He didn't listen. He sprinted into the dark. The tunnel buckled. It was like watching a throat swallow. The walls slammed together with immense force. Cole's scream was short, wet, then silence. A burst of flame shot out of the sealed tunnel, smelling of burned hair. When we reached the spot, there was no tunnel, just a solid wall. Embedded in the center of it, half melted, was Cole's helmet. Malik began giggling quietly. He was muttering equations. Thermodynamics of the soul, he whispered. Energy cannot be destroyed, only transferred. I grabbed him and shook him. Malik, focus. How do we get out? There is no out. He smiled beatifically, his lips cracked and bleeding. There is only in. There has to be a vent, I insisted, turning to Briggs. But Briggs was swaying. His skin was beet red. Heat stroke. We find it, Briggs rasped, his eyes glassy. Or we bake. Behind us, the bones in the stone began to move. I saw the jawbone of the skull in the floor open wider. Finger bones flexing like roots pushing through the wall. The whispers filled every inch of space. Hundreds of voices, burnt, begging, stay, join, warm. Part 5. The Inferno, 58 degrees. Breathing felt like inhaling razors. My lungs hitched with every breath. My vision was tunneling. The world was red and black. We stumbled into a cavern that shouldn't exist. It was vast, the ceiling lost in the haze. In the center was a fissure. It wasn't emitting fire, it was emitting light. Liquid red light. It pulsed. Thump thump. The floor shook with the rhythm. It's not magma, Malik said. His voice was clear now. The madness had clarified into a terrible purpose. It's tissue. He walked toward the fissure, removed his gloves. Malik. No, I croaked. It's alive, Lena, he said, not looking back. Don't you see the whole mountain? It's a single organism. The miners, they didn't find coal. They dug into something ancient. He stepped closer. The heat radiating from the fissure was enough to blister skin from 20 feet away. It's remembering, Malik said. The fissure opened wider. A blast of heat so pure the air rippled white. I pulled Briggs behind a rock outcropping, screaming. Malik didn't scream. He walked straight into the light. The light consumed him. There was a sound, not a sizzle, but a sigh, a distinct sound of satisfaction. When the light dimmed, he was gone. Only molten footprints remained, sinking deeper into the fissure. Briggs collapsed. He wasn't moving. Briggs. I crawled to him. His skin was burning hot to the touch. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. Upper shaft, he whispered. Then he exhaled. A long, rattling breath. And he didn't inhale again. I was alone. I looked at the fissure. It pulsed. It wanted me. Hungry. The word appeared in my mind. Not as a sound, but as a concept. I forced myself to move. I dragged myself away from the heat toward the far wall where the angle of the rock suggested an upward slope. The whispers grew louder. They were bilingual now. Latin, English, twisting Malik's voice, Cole's voice, Danny's voice. Lena, Lena. I found a crawl space. It was tight, angled upward. It seemed cooler. I crawled. The metal of my belt scraped against the rock. My elbows bled. The heat followed me, a physical presence nipping at my heels. I crawled for what felt like hours or years. The tunnel narrowed until I was flat on my stomach, shimmying like a worm. I saw daylight ahead. It shimmered, faint, trembling, but it was blue. Real blue sky. I laughed. A weak, broken sound. I made it, I whispered. Then the tunnel shifted. The stone rippled beneath my palms. Soft, warm. The light at the end flickered. Then it blinked. A massive, horizontal blink. Closing, reopening. It wasn't a hole to the sky. It was an eye. A blue, irisless eye the size of a doorway. The mine wasn't leading me out, it was watching me. I screamed. but my throat was too dry. I closed my eyes and clawed forward anyway. I clawed at the eye. I clawed until my fingernails broke. I clawed until the world dissolved into white. Part 6. The Survivor. The beep of the machine was rhythmic. Beep, beep, beep. It was the first sound that wasn't a heartbeat. I opened my eyes. White ceiling. Fluorescent lights. A nurse was adjusting an IV bag. "She's awake," she said softly. 3 weeks later, they told me what they found. The rescue team found one person near the collapsed entrance. Me. I was dehydrated, delirious. My clothes were melted partially into my skin. I asked about the others. "There was no one else, Miss Grant," the officer said gently. "The mine collapsed decades ago. We found you in the vestibule, barely 10 feet inside the gates." "No," I rasped. "We went down. Briggs, Malik, Cole, Danny." "We have the records of the team," the officer said, exchanging a glance with the doctor. "But there was no gear found, no bodies." Later, they showed me the report. Thermal hallucinations, severe dehydration, self-inflicted trauma. They said I hallucinated the heat, that my brain created the fire to explain the thirst. But they couldn't explain the burns on my back. They couldn't explain why my boots were fused at the molecular level with a type of rock that doesn't exist on the periodic table. I spent months in psychiatric care. The doctors were kind. They listened to my stories about the breathing walls and the heart below. When I finally spoke coherently, I said only one thing to my therapist, Dr. Aris. It wasn't the heat that killed them, I said. It was hunger. Dr. Aris adjusted his glasses. "Whose hunger, Lena?" I didn't answer. I looked toward the corner of the room. The paint there was bubbling, just slightly, a rhythmic pulsing. Thump thump. The room was getting warmer. Dr. Aris didn't notice. He was writing in his notebook. I smiled. A tight, terrified smile. The mine isn't a place. It's a condition. And I didn't escape. I just brought it with me. The thermostat on the wall clicked. The temperature rose to 80, and then 90. "Is it getting hot in here?" Dr. Aris asked, loosening his tie. "No," I whispered, watching the wall breathe. "It's just dinner time." Dr. Aris stared at me, his pen hovering over the yellow legal pad. A drop of sweat, heavy and oily, broke from his hairline and traced a slow path down his temple. He blinked rapidly, as if a film were coating his eyes. "Dinner time," he repeated, the words sounding thick, like his tongue was swelling. "That is an interesting choice of words, Lena. Do you feel consumed?" I didn't answer immediately. I was watching the potted fern in the corner of the office. The leaves were turning brown, curling inward at a speed that was perceptible if you didn't blink. The green vanished, replaced by a brittle, scorched black. "I don't feel consumed, Doctor," I said softly. My voice felt raspier than it had a moment ago. "I feel like a utensil." Dr. Aris chuckled, a nervous, breathless sound. He reached for the glass of water on his desk. As his fingers brushed the condensation, the water inside didn't ripple, it boiled. Just for a second of violent upheaval of bubbles before settling again. He jerked his hand back, knocking the glass over. The water spilled across the mahogany desk, but it didn't splash, it hissed. Steam rose instantly, smelling of old copper and rot. The varnish on the wood began to bubble and peel, revealing not wood grain beneath, but something gray and porous. "What on earth?" Aris stood up, backing away from the desk. He tugged at his collar. "The HVAC system must be malfunctioning. It's stifling in here." He moved toward the door, his movements sluggish. The air in the room had thickened. It wasn't just heat anymore, it was pressure. The same barometric crushing weight I had felt at 50 meters down. My ears popped. "Don't touch the handle," I whispered. Aris didn't listen. He grabbed the brass doorknob. The sizzle was loud. like raw steak thrown onto a cast-iron skillet. He screamed a high, confused shriek and ripped his hand away. The skin of his palm and fingers remained fused to the metal, leaving his hand raw and weeping red. "My hand! God, my hand!" He cradled the injury against his chest, eyes wide with shock. "What is happening? Call for help!" I remained seated. The leather of the armchair was getting sticky, melting against my jeans. "I can't call them, Doctor. The lines don't go out anymore. They only go down." The fluorescent lights overhead began to hum. That familiar insect wing whine. They flickered, the white light shifting to a sickly, jaundiced yellow, and then to a deep amber red. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched, detaching themselves from the furniture. Dr. Eris fell to his knees, wheezing. The oxygen was thinning. I could taste the sulfur now, coating the back of my throat. It was the smell of Black Hollow. The mine hadn't stayed in New Hampshire. It had hitched a ride in the marrow of my bones. "Look at the wall, Doctor," I said. He looked up, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat. The beige paint behind his desk was distending. It pushed outward, stretching like a latex balloon. A shape was forming beneath the surface. A face, elongated, screaming, features blurred, as if viewed through thick glass. Then another face pushed through beside it, and another. "Is that a..." Eris gagged. "Is that a face?" "That's Cole," I said, pointing to the one with the open mouth. "And that one, the small one near the baseboard? That's Danny. He's still looking for his boot." The drywall tore, not with a crumble of plaster, but with a wet tearing sound. Pink, fibrous tissue pulsed in the breach. The room wasn't disintegrating, it was metabolizing. The carpet beneath my feet felt soft, spongy. I looked down and saw the fibers swaying like cilia, coated in that same resinous slime. Dr. Ayres crawled toward me, his injured hand trembling. "Lena, please, make it stop. You're doing this. You're projecting this." "I'm not doing it," I said, feeling a terrible calmness settle over me. The panic that had destroyed me in the tunnels was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow acceptance. "I'm just the door." Thump thump, the floor jumped. Eris was thrown onto his side. The window, the one that looked out onto the hospital parking lot and the gray city skyline, rippled. The view of the cars and the streetlights dissolved, swirling into a vortex of gray and black. The glass cleared, but the city was gone. Pressed against the other side of the glass was rock. Wet, crimson, breathing rock. "We were underground." "No," Aris whimpered, curling into a fetal position. "No, no, no." I stood up. My boots, the new ones the hospital had given me, felt heavy. I walked to the wall where the tissue was exposed. The heat was immense now, surely over 60 degrees. My hospital gown was clinging to me, but I didn't burn. I had already burned. I reached out and touched the pulsing red fissure in the drywall. It felt warm, like touching a horse's flank. "They're hungry," I said. "Not for food, for heat, for life. Thermodynamics, Doctor. Energy transfer." The lights blew out completely. In the darkness, the only illumination came from the fissure, that liquid magma red glow. It cast long, distorted shadows that danced on the ceiling. Dr. Ayres stopped screaming. He was staring at the corner of the room. "Who is that?" he whispered. I turned. Standing in the corner, where the coat rack used to be, was a figure. It was tall, draped in tattered fabric that might have once been a foreman's jacket. It had no face, just a smooth, melted surface where features should be, but it was holding something. A clipboard. "Briggs," I acknowledged. The figure took a step forward. The sound was heavy clump squelch. It raised a hand, pointing a finger that was fused into a singular, sharp bone spike. It pointed at Dr. Ayres. "Protocol," a voice said. It didn't come from the figure. It came from the vents, from the floor, from the inside of my own skull. Safety check. Eris scrambled backward, backing into the desk. Get away! Security! The desk absorbed him, the wood now gray, porous sponge wrapped around his waist. He shrieked as he realized he wasn't just leaning against it, he was sinking into it. The fibers of the desk grabbed his legs, pulling him down. Lena, help me. I watched him. I wanted to help. I remembered what it felt like to be human enough to help. But the memory was distant, like a story read to a child years ago. The heat in the room was comforting now. It felt like a blanket. Don't struggle, I advised. It goes faster if you don't struggle. The heat spikes when you panic. I don't want to die, he wailed, sinking to his chest. The smell of cooking meat began to rise, sweet and pork-like. You're not going to die, I said. Nothing dies here. That's the horror of it. You just integrate. The figure of Briggs moved closer to the trapped doctor. It leaned down, the smooth, faceless head tilted, mimicking curiosity. Dr. Eris stared up into the blank visage, his breathing hitched. What are you? The answer came as a vibration in the floorboards. We are the mouth below. The desk swallowed Eris's shoulders, then his neck. His scream was cut off abruptly as the gray matter closed over his mouth. His eyes remained visible for a moment longer, wide, white, and terrified, before the substance washed over them, sealing him in. The desk smoothed over. A moment later, a new knot appeared in the wood. It looked vaguely like an eye. I was alone with Briggs. The figure turned its head toward me. Status, the voice rumbled. Quarantine failed, I replied automatically. I didn't know why I said it. The words just fell out. The office door, the one leading to the hallway, to the receptionist, to the world outside, began to rattle. Someone was knocking. Dr. Eris? Everything okay in there? We hear shouting. It was the receptionist, Julie. I looked at the door. The paint was bubbling there too. The handle was glowing red. Let them in, the voice whispered. I walked to the door. My hand hovered over the burning knob. I didn't feel the pain anymore. I felt a connection. I turned the lock. Miss Grant? Julie's voice was muffled. I'm coming in. The door swung open, but it didn't open into the hallway. Julie stood there, holding a stack of files. Behind her, the reception area was gone. The waiting room chairs were gone. The elevator bank was gone. Behind her was the tunnel. The crimson, wet, glistening tunnel of Black Hollow. The rails twisted into the dark. The heat blast hit her instantly, blowing her hair back, scattering the files. She froze, staring into the abyss that had replaced the corridor. Where? She stammered. Where is the exit? I stepped aside, gesturing into the infinite, sweltering dark of the office behind me. There is no out, I said, repeating Malik's final lesson. There is only in. Julie turned to run, but the floor tiles of the hallway rippled. They shot upward like teeth. She tripped, falling hard. From the darkness of the tunnel behind her, the wind howled. A hot, wet breath. In the distance, the sound of metal scraping against bone grew louder. I stepped back into the office and sat in the melting leather chair. I picked up Dr. Eris's fallen pen. It was hot, malleable in my fingers. I opened his notebook to a fresh, damp page. Subject, Julie, I wrote. Status, arriving. The walls breathed in, the walls breathed out, and the nightmare continued, expanding. One room, one building, one soul at a time. Julie scrambled backward, her heels digging into the dissolving floor. The industrial gray carpet of the hallway was gone. In its place was the rough, uneven slate of the mine floor, slick with that black, viscous resin. Miss Grant? She choked out, her eyes darting from the impossibility of the tunnel to the mundane reality of her spilled files. What is this? Is this gas? Is there a leak? I watched the papers she had dropped. They were patient intake forms, white paper, black ink. As they touched the ground, they didn't just burn, they aged. The paper yellowed, curled, and then crumbled into gray dust in seconds, as if centuries had passed in the span of a breath. "Not gas, Julie," I said, leaning against the doorframe. The wood was warm against my shoulder, vibrating like a cat's throat. "It's memory. The rock remembers everything. It's just overriding the present." She tried to stand, but her left shoe was stuck. The floor had softened around it, the stone turning to a thick, tar-like putty that bubbled gently. She pulled, crying out as her foot slipped free of the shoe, leaving the pump embedded in the rock. "Help me!" she screamed, looking down the corridor. "Security! Someone help!" Her voice didn't echo like it should in a hospital corridor. It fell flat, swallowed by the density of the air. The humidity was climbing. My skin felt clammy, coated in a layer of moisture that wasn't quite sweat and wasn't quite water. Down the hall, or what used to be the hall, past the nurse's station that was now a jagged outcropping of limestone, a light flickered. It was the ceiling fluorescent, fighting to stay lit. It buzzed, a dying insect sound. Beneath it, the shadows were lengthening, not casting along the floor, but peeling away from the walls. "Don't look at them," I advised, returning my attention to the notebook. I sketched the curve of Julie's spine as she hunched in terror. Subject displays rapid onset panic. Respiratory rate, 40 breaths per minute. "Look at what?" Julie sobbed, freezing. "The miners," I said. "They're shy. They don't like direct eye contact. Not at first." She looked anyway. We always do. 3 shapes detached themselves from the darkness near the elevators. They were vaguely humanoid, but elongated, as if drawn on taffy and pulled too tight. They wore the remnants of gear helmets fused to skulls, belts hanging from exposed pelvic bones. They didn't walk. They shambled, a jerky, stop-motion movement that defied anatomical logic. Julie's scream was piercing. It cut through the low thrum of the mind. "Please!" she shrieked, scrambling on hands and knees back toward me, back toward the office that was already a stomach. "Let me in! Lena, please let me in!" I blocked the doorway. Behind me, the thing that looked like Briggs was running a finger along the spine of a book on the shelf. The book burst into silent flames at his touch. "I can't let you in, Julie," I said gently. "Capacity is limited. Besides, you're already part of the ecosystem." I pointed to her leg. She looked down. Where her stocking foot touched the floor, thin red veins were rising up her ankle. They looked like varicose veins, but they were glowing faintly. They pulsed in time with the walls. Thump, thump. "No," she whispered, clawing at her skin. "Get it off." The fire alarm finally triggered. It should have been a loud, blaring klaxon. Instead, it was a low, mournful horn. The sound of a shift-change whistle from a century ago, deep, resonant. It shook the teeth in my skull. The sprinklers overhead popped, but water didn't rain down. A thick, brown slurry hissed from the nozzles. Rusty water, mine runoff. It smelled of copper and old blood. It sprayed over Julie, soaking her white blouse, plastering her hair to her skull. It was hot, steaming hot. She shrieked as the scalding fluid hit her, curled into a ball, and tried to shield her face. "Temperature rising," I noted aloud. "Precipitation acidic." Through the steam, I saw movement at the far end of the tunnel. The double doors to the stairwell burst open. A security guard, a large man named Miller, I remembered him from check-in, stumbled into the corridor. He was holding a radio, looking frantic. "Dr. Harris? We have reports of smoke." He stopped. He stood on the edge of the transition zone, one foot on clean hospital tile, the other on the wet, breathing rock of Black Hollow. He stared at the cave that had replaced the 4th floor. He stared at the red glow pulsing from the walls. He stared at Julie, writhing in the rusty rain. What the hell? Miller breathed. Don't come in, Miller, I called out. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, layered, harmonic, as if two other people were speaking in unison with me. Shift's full. Miller looked at me. Then he looked at the thing standing behind me in the office. The Briggs thing turned its faceless head toward the door. Miller went for his taser. A natural reaction, useless, but natural. Ma'am, step away from the... He faltered, not knowing how to classify the entity. Step away! He took a step forward, raising the weapon. The instant his second foot hit the rock, the mine claimed him. It was faster this time. The mine was learning. It was getting efficient. A stalactite of bone and rock dropped from the ceiling, which was no longer acoustic tile, but dripping cavern roof. It didn't fall. It thrust downward like a piston. It struck Miller in the shoulder, pinning him to the floor. He didn't even have time to scream. The rock around his feet surged up like a wave, engulfing his legs, waist, and chest in a blink. It hardened instantly. Miller was gone. In his place was a statue of a man, half merged with the floor, his mouth frozen in a shout that would never be heard. His hand, still holding the taser, protruded from the stone. The little green light on the weapon blinked once, then died. Julie stopped screaming. She was staring at Miller's fossilized remains. She looked up at me. Her eyes were glassy. The red veins had reached her neck. "It's warm," she whispered. Her voice was slurring. The terror was draining away, replaced by the lethargy of heat stroke, or perhaps the acceptance of the assimilation. "Yes," I said. "It's very warm. I'm tired." "Sleep," I suggested. "The shift is long." She slumped forward. The floor beneath her seemed to sigh. The rock softened, creating a depression, a cradle. It rose up around her sides, gentle and slow. The rusty water from the sprinklers pooled around her, turning into amber resin. I watched until her face was covered. The rock smoothed over her, leaving only a slight mound in the tunnel floor. I turned back into the office. The Briggs entity was gone. In its place, the room had fully transformed. The desk was a slab of obsidian. The window was a glowing fissure. The walls were weeping that dark, oily fluid. But I wasn't alone. Sitting in the chair opposite mine, the patient's chair, which was now made of woven bone, was a man. He was wearing a suit that looked scorched. His skin was peeling raw and red, but his posture was calm. He was holding a clipboard. It was Dr. Eris. For what was left of him, one side of his face was melted. The eye fused shut. The other eye watched me with a terrifying clarity. He adjusted his glasses, which were bent and blackened. "So," the Eris thing said. His voice was dry, like grinding stones. "We were discussing your feelings of consumption." I sat down. The leather of my chair was hot, but it felt like a hug. "I think we've moved past consumption, Doctor," I said, picking up the pen. "We're on to expansion. Thermodynamics." Aris agreed, nodding sagely. A flake of ash drifted from his cheek. "The system seeks equilibrium. The heat must go somewhere." "The hospital is a big system," I mused. "Lots of fuel." "Indeed." "The vents connect to the pediatric wing. The elevators connect to the basement morgue. The wiring connects to the city grid." Eris leaned forward. "How far does the vein go, Lena?" I closed my eyes. I could feel it. I could feel the pulse of the mine moving through the copper wires in the walls. I could feel it pushing through the PVC pipes. I could feel the heat rising through the elevator shafts, pressurizing the building. I could hear the scream starting on the 3rd floor, then the 5th. "It goes everywhere," I whispered. "It goes until the pressure equalizes." "And when is that?" "When everything is inside." A phone rang. It was the landline on the obsidian desk. It was half melted, the plastic casing bubbling, but it rang with that old-fashioned mechanical trill. Aris looked at it. Then he looked at me. "It's for you." I reached out. My hand was steady. My fingernails were dark. turning into flint. I picked up the receiver. It was hot against my ear. "Hello? Lena?" The voice was crackly, distant, buried under layers of static and the sound of wind, but I knew it. It was Cole. "Cole?" I asked. "Where are you?" "Deep," he rasped. "We're so deep, Lena. But we found something." "What did you find?" "A door," Cole said. And I could hear the smile in his voice, a wet, tearing sound. "A big door. At the bottom of the bottom. Malik is opening the lock." "Malik is dead," I said automatically. "No one is dead," Cole laughed. "Malik says the equations were wrong. It's not a mind, Lena, it's a throat, and we just found the stomach." The line crackled. "We need more heat," Cole whispered. "To open it fully, we need so much more heat." "I'm working on it," I said. "Good. Hurry. The mouth is waking up." The line went dead. I hung up the phone. I looked at Eris. "New objective," I said. Eris pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the air. It looked like dried skin. "Proceed." "Increase temperature," I dictated. "Maximize intake. Prepare for digestion." I stood up and walked to the glowing fissure that used to be the window. I placed my hands against the red light. I pushed, not with my muscles, but with my mind. With the connection that had been burned into me 3 weeks ago, I reached out to the boiler room in the basement of the hospital. I reached out to the electrical transformers on the street. "Burn," I thought. The building groaned. A structural sound. Steel beams softening, concrete sweating. Below me, the floor cracked. A jagged line running from the door to the desk. Heat, visible and shimmering, rose from the crack. The hospital PA system clicked on, but it wasn't a voice. It was a breath. Inhale, the lights in the office exploded. Exhale, darkness. Absolute, sweltering darkness. Then, from the crack in the floor, a red glow bloomed, revealing the new geometry of the room. The walls were receding. The ceiling was rising. We weren't in an office anymore. We were in the gallery, the main chamber, and we had brought the guests with us. I could hear the hospital staff now, dozens of them, hundreds maybe. Their voices were echoing in the vast, stone dark, confused, terrified. "Welcome," I whispered into the dark. "Welcome to Black Hollow." I stepped out of the office and into the throat of the world. The transition was absolute. Where the hallway floor had once been polished linoleum, jagged slate now tore through the foundation, slick with the black, resinous bile of the mountain. The fluorescent lights overhead hadn't just shattered, they had elongated, dripping down from the ceiling like stalactites made of glass and glowing wire buzzing with the sound of angry wasps. Aris followed me, his footsteps heavy and wet. He clicked his pen, a sound that echoed like a pickaxe striking stone. "Subject density is high in the ICU," he remarked, consulting his clipboard of dried skin. "Life support systems provide excellent thermal output. The machines are compatible." "Show me," I commanded. We walked down the corridor. The walls were no longer static. They heaved. Drywall had surrendered to muscle and rock, a patchwork of hospital beige and vein-riddled granite. Posters warning about flu season were now burned into the stone. The smiling faces of stock photo families twisted into expressions of agony, their eyes hollowed out. Ahead, a gurney lay overturned. A young nurse, I think his name was David, was backed into a corner where a vending machine was slowly sinking into the floor. The machine's glass front was fogged with steam. Inside, the candy bars were melting, pooling into a multicolored sludge that dripped onto the floor. David saw me. His eyes were wide, rimmed with soot. He held a scalpel in shaking hands. "Lena," he choked out. "Miss Grant, what did you do?" "I didn't do it, David," I said, stopping a few feet away. The heat radiating from me made him flinch. "I just opened the window. It was getting stuffy in here." "The stairs." He pointed a trembling finger. toward the exit sign, which now glowed a deep arterial crimson. The stairs are gone. It's just a hole. I heard screams falling forever. Gravity is different now, Eris noted, stepping out from behind me. His half-melted face glistened in the red light. We are descending. Always descending. David screamed at the sight of Aris, or the thing wearing Aris's suit. He slashed out with the scalpel. The blade struck Eris's shoulder. It didn't cut cloth or skin. It sparked against stone. The metal snapped, flying past my ear. Aggression, Eris tutted, making a note. Typical stage 1 response. Refusal of the inevitable. The shadows behind David detached themselves from the wall. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were three-dimensional, made of soot and heat shimmer. They reached for him. "Don't!" David shrieked, pressing back against the dissolving vending machine. The heat of the machine seared his scrubs, but he didn't move away. He couldn't. The floor had already grabbed his ankles. "Let him go," I said. The shadows paused. Eris looked at me, his good eye narrowing. "The quota, Miss Grant. We need the BTUs." "He's small," I said, staring at David. "He won't burn long. We need something with more potential." I looked at David. "Where is the generator room? The backup diesel turbines?" David stared at me, weeping. "Basement, level B2. "Thank you, David." I nodded to the shadows. "Take him to the gallery. Put him in the wall. Don't eat him yet. We save the staff for the structural bind." The shadows surged forward, not violent, but inexorable. They wrapped around him like thick smoke. David's screams were muffled as they dragged him not down the hall, but into the wall. The stone softened to accept him, rippling like dark water, and then hardened again, leaving only the faint impression of his face pushing outward from the rock, mouth open in a silent plea. "Efficiency," Eris murmured approvingly. We moved on. The heat was climbing. My skin felt tight, but not painful. I looked at my hands. The flesh was darkening, hardening. My fingernails had turned to obsidian shards. I ran a hand along the wall as we walked. I could feel the building's pulse. It was erratic, terrified. The hospital was alive, and it was dying, and in its death throes, it was becoming something beautiful. We reached the central atrium, the open space that spanned 4 floors, usually filled with natural light from the skylights. Now, there was no sky. The glass roof was gone, replaced by endless, crushing rock. Hanging from the darkness above were chains, massive, rusted iron links, each the size of a man. They swayed gently in the thermal updrafts, clanking with a sound like church bells underwater. Below the lobby was a pit of activity. It wasn't a rescue operation, it was a processing plant. Dozens of the shadow miners were down there, moving with jerky, frantic energy. They were herding patients, some in wheelchairs, some on beds, some limping on broken legs toward the center of the room. In the center of the atrium, the floor had opened up. It wasn't a collapse. It was a mouth, a perfectly circular shaft glowing with that blinding, magma-white light I had seen take Malik. The heat rolling off it was strong enough to blister paint 4 floors up. "The intake shaft," Eris said, leaning over the railing. The railing was hot enough to sizzle his palms, but he didn't seem to mind. Direct line to the lower digestive tract. Cole was right. The flow is increasing. I watched as a shadow miner pushed a hospital bed toward the edge. The patient on it was sedated, unconscious. The bed rolled smoothly over the stone, reached the lip of the shaft, and tipped. There was no sound of impact, just a flash of light as the bed vanished into the white glow, followed by a deep, rumbling thrum that shook the foundation. More. The walls whispered. I felt a vibration in my pocket. The phone again. But I didn't have a phone. I reached into my hospital gown and pulled out a jagged piece of slate. It was vibrating. I held it to my ear. "Lena," Malik's voice said. It wasn't raspy like coals. It was liquid, bubbling like boiling mud. The geometry is correcting itself. I see it, Malik, I said, looking down at the atrium. We're feeding the core. Not enough, he gurgled. The equations demand more entropy. The barrier between the before and the below is thinning, but the pressure needs to be higher. We need a singularity. A singularity? A mass event? Malik said. Individual units are inefficient. We need a chain reaction. The oxygen tanks, the main lines, ignite the breath of the building. I looked across the atrium. On the far side, past the screaming crowds being corralled by the shadows, was the entrance to the east wing. Above the door, a sign read, Maternity, Neonatal ICU, Oxygen Storage. A cold shiver went through me. Not cold, cool. The memory of cold. That's a lot of potential energy, I whispered. The purest, Malik agreed. New life burns the brightest. It tastes like possibility. I'll take care of it. Good. The mouth is opening wider. We can see the city routes now, Lena. We can see the sewers, the subway lines. They look like veins waiting to be filled. The slate stopped vibrating. I dropped it over the railing. It fell into the white shaft and disintegrated instantly. Ours, I said. Yes, Foreman? We're going to the east wing. We need to check the pressure valves. We navigated the walkway. The air was thick with ash and the smell of ozone. The screams from the lobby below were becoming a singular, continuous drone, a choir of the damned that harmonized with the low-frequency hum of the mine. As we reached the east wing doors, I hesitated. They were double doors, reinforced steel. Through the small reinforced windows, I could see people barricaded inside. Nurses, doctors, fathers, holding phone flashlights. They had pushed filing cabinets and beds against the doors. They thought they were keeping the horror out. They didn't understand. The horror wasn't outside. It was the building itself. I placed my hand on the steel door. Open, I whispered. The metal groaned. It didn't unlock. It aged. Rust bloomed outward from my palm, spreading like a fast-forwarded infection. The steel turned orange, then brown, then flaky and brittle. In seconds, the heavy security doors were nothing but a lattice of corroded lace. I pushed my finger through the metal. It crumbled. The barricade inside collapsed as the doors disintegrated into a cloud of red dust. The silence inside the wing was heavy. Dozens of eyes stared at me from the gloom. They saw a woman in a hospital gown, her skin gray and cracking like dry clay, her eyes reflecting a light that wasn't there. Behind her stood a man in a burnt suit with half a face. "Stay back," a security guard shouted, aiming a pistol. His hands were shaking so hard the laser sight danced on the ceiling. "Put that away," I said, my voice echoing with the weight of tons of rock. "Bullets don't work in a blast furnace." "What do you want?" a doctor asked, stepping in front of a row of incubators. "There are babies in here. Oxygen tanks everywhere. One spark, and we all blow." I smiled. The skin of my cheek cracked, weeping black oil. "Exactly," I said. Eris stepped forward, raising his clipboard. "Structural integrity assessment. Oxygen saturation levels are..." He sniffed the air. "Exquisite." The guard fired. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space. The bullet hit me in the chest. It felt like a pebble thrown by a child. I looked down. The lead had flattened against my sternum, fusing with the rock-hard skin, becoming just another mineral deposit in my geology. "Strike recorded," Aris noted. I walked toward the guard. He pulled the trigger again, but the gun jammed. The metal of the slide had fused to the frame. The heat was rising simply because I was in the room. I reached out and took the gun from his hands. It was hot, glowing, dull red. I squeezed. The weapon crumpled like foil, molten metal dripping between my fingers. The guard fell to his knees, gasping. The air was getting too thin to breathe. "The tanks?" I said to Eris. He moved toward the storage closet, ignoring the nurses who tried to claw at him, their hands blistered on contact with his suit. I looked at the doctor standing guard over the incubators. He was weeping silently. "Why?" he asked. "Why are you doing this?" I looked at the tiny, fragile lives in the glass boxes. They were sleeping. They didn't know the world had ended. They didn't know they were already underground. "Because they are cold," I said softly, "and we are going to make them warm forever." Aris kicked the door to the oxygen storage open. Inside, dozens of tall, silver cylinders stood in rows. "Valves," I commanded. Aris didn't turn them. He simply touched them. The brass fittings melted. The seals failed. The hiss was the sound of 1,000 snakes. Pure oxygen flooded the room, invisible and deadly. The concentration spiked instantly. The air became crisp, hyper-real. Every sound was sharper, every color more vivid. "Leaving," I said, turning back to the corridor. "Wait!" the doctor screamed. "You can't leave us here!" "I'm not leaving you," I said over my shoulder. "I'm sending you down." I walked out of the east wing, Eris trailing behind me. We reached the threshold where the rusted dust of the doors lay on the floor. I stopped. I looked back at the terrified faces, at the oxygen hissing into the room, saturating every fiber of clothing, every strand of hair. I raised my hand. I focused on the heat inside me, the magma core that had replaced my heart. I snapped my fingers. The spark was tiny. The result was not... The blast didn't push us away. It sucked the world in. A implosion of fire. A sudden violent consumption of air. The east wing vanished in a white-hot roar. The floor beneath it gave way instantly, the structural supports liquefied by the sudden spike in temperature. The entire wing doctors, nurses, incubators, tanks dropped. They fell into the dark, trailing a comet tail of blue and white fire. The hospital groaned. The shockwave rippled through the stone floor, knocking Eris against the wall. From the deep below, from the stomach of the world, a sound rushed up to meet us. It wasn't an explosion. It was a swallow. Gulp. The heat in the corridor jumped 10 degrees. The walls turned a vibrant, healthy crimson. The veins in the rock pulsed vigorously. I closed my eyes and breathed in the sulfur and the smoke. "Digestion complete," Eris said, his voice trembling with religious ecstasy. "Energy transfer successful." The floor beneath my feet shifted. The slate cracked, revealing a new staircase leading down, not the hospital stairs, but rough-hewn steps cut directly into the bedrock, spiraling down into the red glow. "The way's open," I said. "Malik is waiting." I took the first step down. "Where does it go?" Aris asked, pausing at the top. "To the heart," I said. "We have to restart the heart." As I descended, the shadows on the walls bowed. The whispers grew louder, forming a chant, a rhythm that matched the beat of my own blood. Mouth below, mouth below, mouth below. I wasn't Lena Grant anymore. Lena Grant had died of dehydration 3 weeks ago in a collapsed tunnel. I was the pilot light, and I had a world to burn. The stairs were not uniform. They were cut from the bedrock, yes. But the deeper we went, the less they resembled the work of tools, and the more they resembled the ridges of a throat. The stone was slick, coated in a translucent, viscous fluid that smelled of ozone and ancient, stagnant water. Eris walked behind me, his footsteps heavy and uneven. The sound of his pen scratching against the dried skin clipboard was the only sharp noise in a world of muffled, throbbing bass. "Depth reading?" I asked, not looking back. My voice didn't echo anymore. The walls absorbed it, tasting the vibrations. "Negative 300 meters relative to the surface," Eris replied. "But the spatial geometry is folding. We are technically nowhere, or everywhere." The basement of the hospital occupies the same coordinates as the old main shaft of Black Hollow. Superposition, I murmured. We are stitching the wound shut. Or tearing it open, Aras corrected gently. Perspective, Foreman, perspective. We rounded a spiral in the descent. The red glow from below was brightening, turning the slick walls into mirrors of crimson oil. Embedded in the rock face to my left were objects, fossils of the immediate past. A stethoscope, twisted like a copper snake. A get-well-soon balloon, frozen and calcified. Its cheerful message barely legible under a layer of soot. And then a hand, just a hand, protruding from the granite, at wrist height. The fingers were splayed, the nails blue. It twitched as I passed. I paused. I reached out and touched the cold, trapped fingers. They felt frantic against my palm, vibrating with a pulse that wasn't their own. "Who is this?" I asked. Harris leaned in, his good eye rotating like a camera lens. "Mrs. Gable, room 402. Hip replacement. She was in the elevator when the shaft elongated. Is she comfortable?" "She is. Structural," Harris said. "She is supporting the weight of the nightmare. It is a noble purpose." I patted the hand. "Thank you for your service, Mrs. Gable." I continued down. The heat was becoming a physical weight, a heavy blanket that pressed against my shoulders. It was wonderful. It burned away the itch of being human, the fragility of skin and bone. My hospital gown was charring at the edges, flaking away to reveal the obsidian scales forming underneath, but I felt no pain, only a profound sense of becoming. The stairs ended abruptly, dumping us onto a metal grating. We were standing on a catwalk suspended over a void so vast my mind struggled to map it. This wasn't just a cavern. It was a metropolis of the damned. Below us, stretching into the dark, were the roots of the city. I could see them massive, pulsating tubes that glowed with bioluminescent waste. The sewer lines, the water mains, the subway tunnels. They had been exposed, stripped of the earth that usually cradled them, and were now dangling in the open air of this subterranean cathedral. And they were leaking. The sewer pipes were weeping, black sludge that fell like rain into the abyss. The electrical cables sparked and hissed, sending arcs of lightning jumping between the rock spires. "The nervous system," I whispered. "And the veins," Aris added. A low rumble shook the catwalk. It grew louder, a mechanical shriek of metal on metal. "Look," Aris pointed with his pen. To our right, suspended in the darkness, a concrete tube had been cracked open like an egg. It was a subway tunnel. The jagged edges of the concrete were glowing orange. From the tunnel, a train emerged. It wasn't slowing down. It was derailing into the void. The lead car shot out of the broken tunnel, followed by the second, the third. Sparks showered down like fireworks. I could see the windows of the train cars passing in a blur. I saw faces pressed against the glass commuters, reading papers, listening to music, sleeping. They didn't scream until the train tilted, gravity taking hold, pulling the metal worm down into the red deep. The sound of the crash, seconds later, was a dull thud, followed by a roar of flames that licked upward, illuminating the cavern walls for a heartbeat. The walls were moving, thousands of shadow miners clinging to the rock like bats, watching the feast fall into their laps. "Integration," Aris scribbled furiously. "The transportation grid is feeding the stomach. Efficiency is up 400%. "It's beautiful," I said. "All those people, going to work, going home. Now they're home forever." "Malik is waiting," Aris reminded me. At the junction, we walked along the catwalk. The metal grated under my bare feet, which were no longer feet, really, but fused blocks of hoof-like stone. The walkway led toward a massive, circular structure in the center of the cavern, suspended by chains thick as tree trunks. It looked like a suspended diving bell, or perhaps a heart value. It was made of rusted iron and wet bone. Steam vented from its sides in rhythmic bursts. Hiss thump, hiss thump. We reached the door, a circular hatch wheel that looked like it belonged on a submarine. It was hot to the touch. I grabbed the wheel and turned. It screamed in protest, but the rust yielded to my strength. The door swung open. Heat, thick and wet, rolled out. It smelled of sulfur and old blood. We stepped inside. The room was circular, lined with monitors. But these weren't computer screens. They were slabs of crystal, polished to a mirror sheen, showing distorted reflections of the world above. I saw a traffic cam view of a gridlocked intersection. I saw a security feed from a bank. I saw a baby monitor in a dark nursery. In the center of the room sat Malik. He was no longer a man in a suit. He was fused into the chair, his lower body a mass of wires and stone that disappeared into the floor. His chest was open, ribs spread wide, revealing a core of glowing magma where his lungs should have been. His head was bald, the skin translucent, revealing the pulsing, geometric brain beneath. He didn't turn around. He was typing on a keyboard made of human teeth. "The pressure gradients are stabilizing," Malik said. His voice came from everywhere at once, mediated by the speakers built into the walls. But the surface tension is still too high. The reality membrane resists. "We fed the East Wing to the fire," I said, approaching him. "We gave you the subway." Malik spun his chair around. The movement was smooth, hydraulic. His face, God, his face. His eyes were gone, replaced by two burning coals. His mouth was stitched shut with gold wire, but he spoke through the vibration of his throat. "Biomass is fuel, Lena," Malik intoned. "Biomass creates heat, but heat is just energy. We need intent. We need authority." He pointed a crystal finger at me. "You are the foreman. You have the contract." "I do," I said. "The contract of Black Hollow requires a signature, not in ink, in nature." Malik gestured to the monitors. "The city is fighting back. The emergency services are mobilizing. They are pouring water down the shafts. They are trying to cool us." On one of the crystal screens, I saw firefighters spraying hoses into a sinkhole. The water turned to steam instantly, but more kept coming. "Fools," Aris sneered. "They think it's a fire. They don't know it's a fever," I said. Malik nodded. The magma in his chest flared brighter. "To break the surface tension, we need to invert the atmosphere. We need to bring the below above. We need to make the sky burn." "How?" "The ventilation system," Malik said. "The lungs of the city. We are connected to the sewers, yes? And the sewers connect to the storm drains. And the storm drains connect to the atmosphere." He tapped a sequence on the toothed keyboard. A holographic schematic of the city appeared in the air, a web of red lines. "We have enough heat now," Malik gurgled. "If you release the valve, we can push the infernal breath up through every manhole cover, every toilet, every sink, every HVAC unit in the tri-state area. We won't just heat the hospital, Lena. We will turn the entire city into a kiln." I stared at the map. I traced the lines of the streets I used to walk, the coffee shop where I bought muffins, the park where I jogged. I imagined them all turning to ash. I imagined the air turning to soup. I imagined the silence. "Do it," I said. "I cannot," Malik said. "I am the calculator. I only measure. You are the foreman. You must pull the lever." He gestured to the center of the room. Rising from the floor was a lever made of spinal column, topped with a skull that was polished smooth by 1,000 hands. "The master vent," Aris whispered reverently. "The exhalation." I walked toward it. The floor felt spongy, like walking on a tongue. I reached out and grasped the skull. It was warm. It felt like it was purring. "If I do this?" I asked, looking at Malik. "What happens to us?" Malik's coal eyes flared. "We stop being miners, Lena. We become the mine." I looked at Aris. He was adjusting his tie, checking his reflection in a monitor. He looked ready for a business meeting in hell. I looked at the monitors showing the world above, the flashing lights of the fire trucks, The people running, the cold, gray sky. It looked so lonely up there, so separate. "Let's bring them in," I whispered. I pulled the lever. The resistance was immense. It felt like I was trying to move a mountain with my arm. The muscles in my back tore, then knit back together instantly with strands of rock. My bones groaned. The heat in the room spiked. Snap. The lever shifted. The sound that followed wasn't a noise. It was a change in atmospheric pressure so violent my ears popped and bled black fluid. The diving bell room shook. On the monitors, the world changed. From every manhole cover in the city, a pillar of red steam erupted. It wasn't smoke, it was superheated vapor, the breath of the deep earth. I watched a fire truck on the screen. The steam hit it. The paint bubbled. The tires melted. The firefighters collapsed, their suits shrinking around them like shrink wrap. The sky above the city turned from gray to a bruised, swirling purple. The clouds evaporated. The camera feed distorted, turning red, then white, then static. One by one, the crystal screens shattered. Malik threw his head back and let out a sound of digital ecstasy, a screech of feedback and grinding gears. "The pressure is equalizing," he screamed. "The barrier is gone. The surface is now the ceiling." The room began to descend. The chains holding us rattled and spooled out, lowering us deeper into the dark. "Where are we going now?" I shouted over the roar of the descent. "To the stomach," Malik laughed. "To the digestive tract. We have prepared the meal, Lena. Now we must meet the eater." The floor beneath the lever cracked. The lever itself dissolved into sludge. Aris was writing furiously, his pen tearing through the skin paper. "Casualty projections exceeding 3 million. Thermal output sufficient to hatch the core. This is exemplary work, Foreman." I looked at my hands. They were glowing. Not reflecting light, but emitting it. Veins of lava ran up my arms. I wasn't just warm. I was burning. "I'm hungry," I said. And the voice wasn't mine. It was deep, multiple, echoing from the bottom of a well. "Good," Aris said, looking at me with his melted face. "Because supper is served." The room slammed to a halt. We weren't in a cavern anymore. We were in a hallway. But it wasn't the hospital. It was familiar. The walls were covered in wood paneling, peeling and rotten. The carpet was a shag brown, soaked in water. There was a smell of stale tobacco and boiled cabbage. I recognized it. It was the hallway of my childhood home. The house I grew up in. The house where my father used to sit in the dark and drink until he couldn't speak. But the proportions were wrong. The ceiling was 50 feet high. The door at the end of the hall was the size of a cathedral gate. A memory construct. Malik analyzed, his voice quieter now, wary. The entity uses familiar templates to facilitate the interface. "It's my house," I said. "No," Aris said, stepping up beside me. "It's the antechamber." The massive door at the end of the hall creaked. A sliver of darkness opened. From that darkness came a voice. It didn't sound like a monster. It sounded like Cole. "Lena," the voice rasped. "Come in, darling. Shift's over. Time to clock out." I walked down the hall. My footsteps left scorched footprints on the wet shag carpet. "Cole is dead," I said. "Cole is part of the choir," Malik whispered from his chair. "We are all part of the choir." I reached the giant door. I didn't need to push it. It sensed my heat and swung inward. Inside, there was no floor. There was no ceiling. There was only a suspended platform of rock in a universe of red lightning. And on that platform stood the thing that had been waiting for us since the 80 seconds. Since the first pickaxe struck the wrong stone. It wasn't a demon. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. He was sitting on a crate of dynamite, whittling a piece of bone with a rusted knife. He looked exactly like Briggs, the foreman who had led us down here 3 weeks ago. But he was 50 feet tall, and his skin was made of the faces of the missing miners. hundreds of them, shifting and moaning, stitched together to form the giant's flesh. The giant Briggs looked up. His eyes were missing. In their sockets were 2 tunnels leading down into infinite darkness. "You're late," the giant rumbled. The voice was a landslide. I stepped onto the platform. Aris stayed by the door, bowing low. Malik wheeled his chair to the edge of the threshold, humming with static. "I had to clean up upstairs," I said, looking up at the Titan. "Did you scrub it clean?" the Briggs thing asked. He stood up. The sound of his movement was the sound of tectonic plates grinding. "I burned it clean," I answered. The giant smiled. His teeth were tombstones. "Good girl," he said. "The old ones, the deep ones, they don't like the cold. And the surface is so very cold." He took a step toward me. The platform shook. "You brought the fire," he said. "But do you have the heart to keep it lit?" He reached out a hand the size of a van. He wasn't attacking. He was offering. "Give it to me," he commanded. "Give you what?" "The spark," he rumbled. "The thing that keeps you, Lena. The thing that remembers the sun. The thing that remembers hope." He leaned down, his tunnel eyes staring into me. "I can't let the fire go out, Lena. And as long as you hope for rescue, as long as you remember the sky, the fire flickers. It creates a draft." He opened his palm. "Give me your name. Give me your past. Give me your fear. Put it in my hand." I stood there, vibrating with the heat of a burning city. I thought about the rescue team. I thought about the blue sky. I thought about my apartment, my cat, my bills, my life. They felt like dust. They felt like ash. "And if I give it to you?" I asked. "Then you stop burning," the giant promised. "And you start ruling." I looked at Aris. He nodded. I looked at Malik. He was calculating the variables, and for the first time, he looked satisfied. I looked back at the giant. I reached into my chest. My hand passed through the molten skin, through the obsidian ribs, and grasped the small, fluttering bird that lived in the center of the fire. The part of me that was still scared, the part of me that was Lena Grant, it hurt. It hurt more than the heat. I pulled it out. It looked like a small, white flame, trembling in the dark. "Here," I said. I placed a flame in the giant's hand. He closed his fist. The flame died. And with it, the last of the pain, the last of the fear, the last of the humanity. The giant threw his head back and laughed. The sound shattered the reality of the room. The wood paneling exploded. The carpet turned to lava. "Accepted," he roared. The platform began to rise. Not up. In. Now, the entity that was no longer Briggs said, looking down at me with approval. "Now we are ready for the night shift." He pointed to the darkness beyond the platform. "Go," he said. "Wake the others. The world is waiting to be mined." I turned toward the dark. I didn't walk. I flowed. The rock moved with me. The heat was me. I opened my mouth to speak, but Lena's voice was gone. What came out was the sound of the earth splitting open. "Understood," I said. And the nightmare began in earnest. The darkness was not empty. It was heavy, textured, and incredibly dense. It felt like pushing through wet velvet that had been soaked in crude oil. I moved forward, but I didn't walk. Walking implies a separation from the ground, a lifting and placing of feet. I didn't have feet anymore, not in the way I used to understand them. My lower half was a fusion of scorched basalt and cooling lava, a skirt of geological force that slid over the terrain. I was a glacier of heat. Eris scrambled to keep up, his shoes smoking as they touched the path I forged. Malik's chair hummed, its treads gripping the new, impossible geometry of the tunnel. "The barracks," Aris wheezed, consulting his clipboard. The skin paper was peeling, curling up in the heat, but he pinned it down with a finger that had too many joints. "We need to process the new intake before the shift whistle blows." "Lead the way," I said. My voice was a grinding of tectonic plates, a sound felt in the teeth rather than heard by the ears. We rounded a corner that shouldn't have existed, a sharp, non-Euclidean angle that bent gravity sideways. We were suddenly moving vertically, yet I felt no vertigo. Down was wherever I decided it was. We emerged into the gallery where the subway train had fallen. It was a cathedral of wreckage. The twisted metal of the train cars lay across the jagged rocks like the broken spine of a silver serpent. The fires had died down to a low, sullen smolder, painting the cavern in bruising shades of purple and charcoal. But it was the silence that held the weight. Hundreds of shapes were scattered among the debris. The commuters, the people who had been reading books, checking watches, worrying about dinner, they were not dead. Death is a release. This was something far more efficient. They were calcifying. I glided toward the nearest wreckage. A woman was half embedded in the twisted metal of a door frame. Her business suit was fused with the steel, the fabric turning into a hard, dark resin. Her skin had taken on the sheen of polished graphite. Her eyes were open, staring at the cavern ceiling, but the whites were gone, replaced by the dull luster of hematite. She was breathing, but barely. A slow, rhythmic intake of the sulfurous air. Hiss, hold, release. Batch 404, Malik analyzed, his chair hovering beside me. A scanner arm extended from his chest, sweeping a red laser over the woman's frozen form. Carbon conversion at 80%. Their biology is adapting to the geothermal pressure. They are hardening. They are becoming the tools. I corrected him. Precisely, Malik agreed. Soft flesh cannot mine the deep. We need diamond skin. We need lungs that breathe ash. I looked out over the sea of bodies. Hundreds of them. Some were curled in fetal positions, encased in chrysalises of stone. Others were standing frozen mid-scream, their mouths open tunnels leading into their own hollow interiors. Wake them, I commanded. They are not fully cured, Eris warned, tapping his pen nervously. If we wake them too early, they might break. Psychologically, I turned to Eris. The heat radiating from my core made his tie curl up and disintegrate into soot. There is no psychology down here, Aris. Only geology. Wake them. I reached out to the woman in the door frame. My hand, now a claw of obsidian and fire, hovered over her face. I didn't touch her. I didn't need to. I simply projected the will of the mind, the hunger. Get up. The command wasn't a word. It was a vibration. A frequency that resonated with the iron in her blood. The woman's hematite eyes blinked. A sound escaped her throat, a dry crackle, like stepping on autumn leaves. Then, a cough. A cloud of gray dust expelled from her lungs. She turned her head. The movement was stiff, mechanical. Her neck ground audibly. She looked at me, but she didn't scream. She didn't ask for help. She recognized the heat. She recognized the authority. Foreman, she rasped. Her voice sounded like two stones being rubbed together. What is your function? I asked. She looked down at her hands. Her fingers had elongated, the nails turning into sharp, black chisels. Her arms had thickened, the muscles replaced by cords of wire-strong rock. To dig, she said. And what do we dig for? For the heat, she recited, as if remembering a dream she'd had since birth. We dig to let the heat out. Good, I said. Join the line. She pulled herself free from the wreckage. The metal groaned and snapped as she tore herself loose, but she didn't bleed. There was no blood left to spill. She stood up, 7 feet tall now, encased in her natural armor, and walked toward the center of the cavern. I moved through the wreckage, waking them one by one. A young man who had been listening to headphones. The headphones were now part of his skull, receivers for the mind's orders. An elderly man with a cane. The cane had fused to his arm, becoming a pry bar of bone and oak. a mother clutching a child. They had fused together into a multi-limbed excavator, a tragic, beautiful engine of destruction. Yield is exceptional, Malik muttered, his fingers flying across his toothed keyboard. The integration of surface dwellers provides a cognitive boost to the hive mind. They remember the layout of the city. They know where the weak points are. They know where the pipes are, I added. They know where the foundations rest. Within an hour, the army was assembled. 300 drone miners, standing in perfect rows amidst the smoke. They stood silent, motionless, waiting for the signal. Their eyes glowed with a faint, bioluminescent, red little pilot lights of their own. Eris stood at the front, looking proud. The night shift is ready to clock in, Foreman. Where do we deploy? I looked up. Far above us, through the miles of rock and the twisted geometry of the descent, I could feel the surface. I could feel the panic. I could feel the rescue teams drilling, trying to find voids, trying to find survivors. They were drilling down. They were making it easy for us. We don't go back up the way we came, I said. That shaft is sealed. I pointed to the massive, weeping wall of the cavern, the sheer cliff face that dripped with the black sludge of the city's waste. We go through the infrastructure, I said. Malik, locate the main aquifer. Malik's head spun, his sensors triangulating. Bearing 040, the city's main water reservoir sits directly above the limestone shelf to our north. Approximately 2 kilometers of solid rock. Not solid. I smiled. The magma in my chest flared, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. Solidity is just a state of mind, and we are going to change its mind. I turned to the army. You remember the water. I addressed them. You remember drinking it, bathes in it. Now we are going to boil it. I raised my hand. Dig. The sound was instantaneous and deafening. 300 hardened bodies threw themselves at the cliff face. Hands like pickaxes struck the stone. Sparks flew in a blinding curtain. They didn't tire. They didn't pause for breath. They tore into the rock with a fervor that was terrifying to behold. They weren't just digging a tunnel. They were eating the earth. I watched them for a moment, satisfied. Then I turned to Malik. While they breached the aquifer, I need you to prepare the broadcast, I said. Malik paused. Broadcast? The rescue teams, I said. They are listening. They have geophones, sonar, thermal sensors. They are listening for tapping, for screams, for life. I moved closer to Malik, my heat warping the air around us. We need to send them a message, a frequency that carries the infection. Malik's mechanical mouth twitched into a smile. A psychoacoustic virus? Embedded in the seismic tremors? Yes, I said. When they put their headphones on to listen for survivors, I want them to hear us. I want the sound to heat their blood from the inside out. I will compose the symphony, Malik promised. He adjusted a dial on his chest, and a low, throbbing hum began to emanate from him, a bass note that made my vision vibrate. Eris stepped up to me. And me, Foreman? What is my task? You, I said, looking at the little man with the melting face. You have the most important job of all. I pointed toward the darkness where the giant Briggs entity had vanished. Go back to the antechamber. Find the files. The personnel records of the city. The census? Aris asked. The menu, I corrected. I want to know who lives in the penthouses. I want to know who runs the power grid. I want to know who is in charge of the evacuation. You want to target leadership? I want to send them special invitations, I said. The management always gets the best view of the collapse. Eris bowed so low his nose grazed the hot stone. It will be done. He scurried away into the dark. I turned back to the wall. The miners had already carved a hole 10 feet deep. The air was filling with dust, but to me, it smelled like progress. I glided forward, entering the tunnel they were creating. The heat here was intense, trapped by the fresh rock. The miners parted for me, their bodies slick with sweat that smelled of ammonia. I reached the front of the dig. The rock face was gray granite, laced with veins of quartz. I placed my hand against it. I closed my eyes and extended my senses. I could feel it. Above the millions of gallons of water, the reservoir. It was cool, dark, and heavy, and floating in that water, reflections of the moon. I hated the moon. It was a cold, dead eye that watched without blinking. I pushed. Heat surged from my arm into the granite. The rock didn't melt. It shattered. The thermal shock caused the quartz to explode outward. The miners cheered a sound like grinding gears and surged forward into the gap. We were rising, and as we rose, the whispers in the walls changed. They were no longer the voices of the dead miners from the 80 seconds. They were new voices. The voices of the city above. Is it getting hot in here? Why is the tap water steaming? Do you hear that drumming in the basement? I laughed. The sound traveled up through the rock, up through the soil, up through the foundations. Malik, I called out over the roar of the excavation. Start the music. A moment later, a rhythm began to pulse through the mine. It wasn't music in the human sense. It was the rhythmic thudding of a colossal heart, amplified by Malik's machinery broadcast through the tectonic plates. Thump, thump, thump. On the surface, 3 miles above, a seismologist in a van adjusted his headset, frowning at the strange reading on his monitor. He pressed the cups tighter to his ears, trying to isolate the noise. What is that? He whispered to his colleague. It looks like a heartbeat. He turned the volume up. Down in the dark, I smiled. Open wide, I whispered, and the first crack appeared in the reservoir floor.